I will not use the word Palestinians, which is the biggest lie of the 20th century.
There is a Palestinian people. It quacks like a people, it walks like a people, it's a people.
By using this lie, we're giving this argument to our enemies. In Gaza, we should evacuate the Gaza Strip until the last Arab, men, women, and children.
Will it happen? No. What are the chances? Zero.
President Trump offered it to us. The reason it didn't happen was not the Americans, it was us.
This is just hallucinate that it's possible. You've used a word that I'm not willing to be heard around me, and that's the word solution.
I believe there is a solution.
The only thing in life that has solutions are crossword puzzles.
We lifted democracy to the same level of the Jewish identity of the state in order to destroy the Jewish state.
An Israel that will not be democratic will not have the Jews, my kind of Jews. My Jewish identity is so strong, I don't need the religion. I can enjoy reading the Bible, eating shrimp.
This land is only our land and not their land because God said so. By the way, this is the only language that they understand.
Okay, welcome everyone to an exceptionally rare and special JTV segment where we're joined by two titans in Israel that are really at the forefront of making the case for Israel, and both care passionately about the future of Israel, but also have, I've noticed from speaking to both of them, different perspectives on some of the most pressing questions that Israel faces. I wanted to get them together to allow you, the viewer, to hear the arguments on some really important questions and let you decide, as we're joined by our two guests who will thrash out some of these issues. We're joined by Professor Dan Schueftan, who's in the middle of this screen here. He's the former advisor to prime ministers including Yitzchak, Rabin and Ariel Sharon. He's an Israeli academic, chairman of the National Security Studies Center at the University of Haifa. Dan and I, we had a great session a few weeks ago. You can check that out on JTV. Professor Dan, it's great to have you back. We're also joined by Moshe Feiglin. Both of them are talking to us from Israel, by the way. Moshe is former deputy speaker of the Knesset, leader of the Zehut Party in Israel right now. So he's a politician. And he's also an author, and he's the author of this book, which he told me he's just came out with, Israel is Just the Beginning. I've been reading it right now. I'm really, really enjoying it and finding some of the arguments that Moshe, that you're making, absolutely fascinating. And so having read your book and having listened to Professor Dan, I thought, let's get you two together for a conversation and a bit of a debate. So the first topic, we're going to address two big topics today. The first one is the question of whether it's so important that Israel isn't just, in my view, fighting the current threat, but also has a vision. I think the world are also a bit frustrated with us. They're like, okay, but what's your actual long-term plan here? And so the question is, what is the right long-term plan for the whole two-state solution question, the Palestinians, the Judea and Samaria and Gaza question? Should Israel annex them? Should they put turn the page on the whole two-state solution question? Or is that really the only possible viable solution? Then we'll later turn to the question of your broader vision for Israel's identity moving forward, because I've noticed, Moshe, you kind of lean more into going towards a more biblical religious identity. Professor Dan Schueftan, a Western Enlightenment paradigm. So let's start off with the question of Judea and Samaria and Gaza. Professor Dan Schueftan, let's start with you.
Okay, first of all, let us remove a profanity. You've used a word that I'm not willing to be heard around me, and that's the word solution. The only thing in life that has solutions are crossword puzzles. Okay, the whole simplistic approach that says, the engineer's way of thinking. Here's a problem, what's the solution? When you speak about human affairs, you can at best get a good response. And a good response is a combination of minimizing the damage control, and the use of opportunities. So let us have a vision about where we want to go, but when we speak about strategies, when we speak about policies, let's avoid the term solution, particularly when it comes with the ridiculous notion of a two-state solution. Number two, I don't think Moshe and I will disagree on a number of issues, and let's remove them from the table concerning Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. The land of Israel, the Jewish people has the right, the historic right for the land of Israel. Even the kind of rights to an independent state that the Palestinians may have had, they have forfeited by behaving barbarically for 100 years, because their national objective is not to build their nation, but to prevent the Jews from having a nation state. So I don't feel in any way uncomfortable with the fact that they are under occupation. I'm sorry, I wish it could be different, but their behavior necessitated Israel imposing on them a kind of reality where we can prevent them from killing us. So here I don't think we will have a disagreement. But since the 1967 war, and actually also since the 1948 war, I want to disengage from the overwhelming majority of the Judea and Samaria and from all of the Gaza Strip, and not have it as part of the state of Israel, not because we don't deserve it, we do, not because they deserve it, they don't, not because getting out of these areas will bring peace, it won't, but because I don't want to cohabitate with them, and because the option of getting them out is not realistic in the 20th or the 21st century. Maybe if we would have had this discussion in the 18th century, things would have been different, but it's not now. And my way of explaining it is to go back to Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion was a greater Israel in terms of today person. He once was very angry when somebody told him that we should have reached all of the land of Israel up to the River Jordan. And he said, what about what's happening east of the River Jordan? So ideologically, Ben Gurion did not have a problem. But what happened in the mandatory period was very tragic, because the three assumptions of the Zionists in the period of the British Mandate have all collapsed. We assumed in the 1920s that the Arabs will acquiesce, the British will support, and the Jews will come. In 1929, it became clear to everybody that the Arabs will not acquiesce. In 1939, the British made very clear that they won't support. And in the 1940s, in the early 1940s, the Jewish people that was supposed to come was murdered by Adolf Hitler. And therefore, Ben Gurion changed his basic strategy. And in 1948, when we could have taken Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem in a few days of fighting, Ben Gurion saw to it that this attempt will not be made, because he didn't want it to succeed, because he realized that if we establish a Jewish state with an Arab majority, it cannot be both Jewish and democratic, and if it will not be both Jewish and democratic, it will not survive. And first, Ben Gurion lied to everybody. This is one of the things I enjoy about Ben Gurion. He was a virtuoso liar, and he lied even to his diary. It was a lot of fun. I had the opportunity to speak to him about it. And later, he said it very clearly and very openly. This is the option, and this is why also after 1967, after 1967, after the Six-Day War, Ben Gurion wanted to leave the territories that we've occupied in 67, or liberated, if it makes you feel better to say so, except the Golan Heights, which was empty of population, and Jerusalem. Now, Israel tried in 93, in a very foolish way, to establish a Palestinian state. Gradually, it would have developed into a Palestinian state in agreement with the PLO, and it failed, and there was never a chance that it would have succeeded. It was a hallucination. The whole Oslo process was a hallucination. In 2005, Israel gave the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip a de facto state. And the inevitable consequence was the war that we've seen on 7th of October. So today, to speak about the establishment of a Palestinian state, here is the interesting thing. I think Moshe and I will be against it for different reasons. I know what will happen. If they will have a state, they will bring the Iranians in, we will have a major war, then we will occupy it, and then we will be stuck with it forever. And then it will become part of the state of Israel. And I don't want it. And it is completely unrealistic. And at the moment, the only thing we can do, unfortunately, I wish we had what you call the solution. We don't have a solution. The only option we have at the moment is the continuation of the present reality. I would have wished that inside the heavily populated part of Judea and Samaria, there would not be a Jewish presence, so that we can have Jews and Arabs in Judea and Samaria not cohabitating in the same area. I would have separated the area in the West Bank that is heavily populated, and eventually I want to get rid of it one way or another. But for now, we must be in a position, we don't have another choice. We must be in a position where every time we know of any kind of danger that is developing in Judea and Samaria or in Gaza, we can come in, destroy whatever is prepared to fight against us, and get out. So I need it for security purposes. Unfortunately, today, as much as in 1948, I believe that if millions of Arabs, 7 million or 6 million Palestinians cohabitate with us in addition to the Arabs inside Israel, the inevitable result would be a civil war and a terrible quality of life in Israel. I don't have a solution, but I think that for the time being, we must combine separating the two populations and having absolute security control over this area.
Okay, is that the end of your opening remarks?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, great. All right. Moshe, let's go to you. Your opening statement on this.
Okay, thank you, Oli. Thank you, Dan. Well, even though in some of the basic assumption that Professor Schueftan gave at the beginning, I certainly agree. I will use the word solution. I believe there is a solution. And I will not use the word Palestinians, which is the biggest lie of the 20th century. And I believe that Professor Schueftan may, as an historian, may agree with that. When we're using the word Palestinians, we're using this invented nationality that was created only for one reason, and it is to erase our national connection to our promised land. So I don't understand. I never understood why Israelis from the right and from the left are using the language that was invented to destroy us. It's a big lie. There is no Palestinian nation, and the leaders of the Arabs in Israel, when you talking to them privately, and in many occasions, even not privately, admit it. Okay, so let's put the word Palestinian aside. Now, when you're talking about solution, you need to understand what is the problem. Now, Professor Schueftan went to the most common way of thinking and basically said that the problem is a demographic problem. Because of demography, we need to give away our full sovereignty and between the river and the sea, okay, and somehow give up on Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip and so on, and come to some kind of so-called solution. Well, I don't think the problem is demographic problem. When Ben Gurion was ready to establish the state of Israel, the famous demograph, I think his name was Professor de la Pergola, correct me if I'm wrong, told Ben Gurion that do not even think of establish the Jewish state, because demographically it's impossible. And he was right. There are 600,000 Jews here, 600,000 Arabs here, and they were growing much faster than us. They had 6 kids per woman then, or at least, okay? So there was, according to these rules, to these demographic rules, the state of Israel should have not been established. Not only that, Professor Arnon Sofer said during the 80s that until the year 2000, there'll be more Arabs. I'm talking about in the 80s, not in 40 years later. That until the year 2000, there will be a majority of Arabs inside the Green Line. So we should have gave away the Galilee, maybe, or gave away the Negev, and keep on shrinking ourselves only to the parts that there is a major Jewish majority over there. And of course, this is not acceptable, I assume, also on Professor Schueftan's mind. So what is the real problem? What is the real problem that we're looking for a solution to? The real problem is that, on one hand, their goal, the Arabs I will use the words of Ernst Bevin. Ernst Bevin, the foreign minister of England, when he came to the UN in 1947 to explain what is the problem in Palestine at the time, before the establishment of the state of Israel. He came to the UN before the famous vote in the UN, and he said the problem in Palestine, his words, the problem with Palestine is that the Jews in Palestine wants to create a Jewish state, and the Arabs in Palestine, he did not say Palestinians because they were not Palestinians. The Arab in Palestine, they want that the Jews will not create a Jewish state. And that's the whole story. There's one part who wants to have a Jewish state, and there's another part who will not give up on 1 square inch in the Holy Land under the sovereignty of the Jews. That is the problem. The question is, how do you take away their hope to succeed? How do you get them to understand that there's no chance they'll ever achieve that goal, and to give up on fighting against the Jews? And the answer is that we, the Jews, the Israelis, have to understand that the motivation that puts them into war with us all the time is not the despair, it's the hope. We're trying to tell ourselves all the time that because they don't have the economic conditions, don't have enough money, don't have enough food, they're not westernized enough, and so on. What makes them fight is not their position. What makes them fight is the hope to succeed. And what gives them the hope to succeed is when we are losing the religious attitude to the land, the holiness attitude to the land. When they feel that for us, the land is just a real estate to negotiate about. When that dimension of holiness is out of our speech, out of our language, they see us as just a Western occupiers, the new colonialists, that it's only a matter of time until they'll finish us and win. So, what is the solution? The solution is, first of all, to understand that this land is only our land and not their land because God said so. By the way, this is the only language that they understand. And this is the only language that the most of humanity who believes in the Bible understand. I know Professor Schueftan don't like this language, but I'm sorry. The other kind of language did not work and led us to the 7th of October. This is the only language that will work. Okay? This is the language why we got the Balfour Declaration to begin with, by the way. That was the motivation, the spiritual motivation behind the Balfour Declaration. And we should go back to that core, understand that this is our land because God gave it to us. And then from that position, go down to the details. And the truth is, now listen to me carefully. The truth is that in Gaza, there is no more than 800,000 Arabs left. And we should evacuate the Gaza Strip until the last Arab, men, women, and children, just as the Allies did to the Germans in Czechoslovakia and Poland. 12 million Germans were evacuated after the war, not during the war, after the war. Million, by the way, died on the process. They won the war, and then they understood that this problem cannot be continued and evacuated, marched 12 million Germans, men, women, and children, back into the ruins of Berlin and Hamburg. After the 7th of October, there's no other solution than taking this 800,000 Arabs in Gaza and let them find their future in a better place than in a place where all the future that can offer is a continuous war, and the next 7th of October is in the future. That's in Gaza. In Judea and Samaria, there is no more than 1.5 million Arabs. And I'm standing behind the numbers, and not only me, okay? 1.5 million Arabs. By the way, if there would have been more, I would come with the same solution, but give it more time because it's my land. I'm talking about justice over here. Let's put this word also on the table. But the truth is, there's only 1.5 million, about half of them already wish to leave. The demographic is playing in favor of the Jews today. The number of the Jews, the percentage of the Jews between the river and between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean getting bigger and bigger. The demographic direction is totally in the favor of the Jews. When you conclude both sides, so what you need to do in Judea and Samaria is give them the best conditions to leave. The amount of money.
30 seconds left, by the way, Moshe.
I'll finish. The amount of money that Israel invested in other non-realistic ideas of living side by side with this death trap with the so-called Palestinian people was enough to give every family in Judea and Samaria today, when combined together, over $5 million per family. Just to understand. Just imagine using carrots on one hand, economical carrots on one hand, and big stick on the other hand to encourage them to leave. You can lower their numbers and annex the land and start see new future to Israel and to the Middle East.
Okay, Moshe, thank you so much. And to you, Professor Dan, both of you for your opening statements. I'll go back to you now, Professor Dan Schueftan, for your response to what Moshe said. You've got 8 minutes for a response.
No, I'll do it very shortly. First of all, there is a Palestinian people. A people is not something good or bad. The Palestinian people is flawed, and I spoke about the basic flaw. They don't have a constructive bone in their national body, and their leadership is repulsive and corrupt, and whatever you want to say, but it's a people. It quacks like a people, it walks like a people, it's a people. By the way, it doesn't mean that I have to give them anything because they're a people, because they have forfeited the basic right of self-determination by doing, and here we both agree, by focusing all the national efforts on destroying us rather than on building themselves. And I don't think it's important. If we stop calling them Palestinians, we'll start calling them Oompa Loompa, it won't make any difference in any way. I also agree with Moshe, and by the way, let's speak about Moshe and Dan if we bring this professor into the conversation. It's just cumbersome. I also agree with Moshe that it is not despair but hope. But what gives them hope is the fact that they constantly get billions of dollars from the Americans, from the Europeans, through the United Nations, and everybody recognizes them. What recently gives them hopes is the fact that countries like Britain and Canada and Australia and France are recognizing today the existence of a non-existent Palestinian state, that a bunch of completely confused kids in American universities are going out and saying, liberate Palestine. This is what gives them hope. What gave them hope was, for a while, the existence among Israelis of progressive, I'm delighted to say that they have committed electoral suicide, that believed that we must get up in the morning and ask ourselves, how are we guilty about what is happening to the Palestinians? I'm delighted that this is erased since the Second Intifada and the 7th of October. And one last comment. Moshe used the term justice, and he said, let justice be, the basis for our policy. Justice is very nice, but history is not determined by justice. I mean, in what terms of justice can you explain anti-Semitism, the Holocaust? The establishment of the State of Israel was not a product of justice. It was the product of the fact that Jews have decided to take their fate into their own hands, and we imposed the existence of the State of Israel on our neighbors that didn't want it. It is not because we were just. It helped us convince ourselves that we have a just cause. That's very important. Inside, yes. But this is not what determines history. And perhaps one last comment. Would I love it if there really were only 700 or 800,000 Palestinians in the West Bank, and they would leave, from the West, from the Judea and Samaria? Yes. Will it happen? No. What are the chances? Zero. No sticks and no carrots can produce it. They won't do it. This is just hallucinating that it's possible. Now, is it true that it happened after the Second World War with the Germans in Poland? Yes, because the two superpowers agreed on it and made it possible. Unfortunately, it is not possible here, and therefore, hoping for it is nice, and believing in God and that God will help us do it is also helpful to some people, not helpful to others, myself included. I don't expect divine intervention to help me do it. And therefore, I think that the whole approach is focused on what should happen and not on what can happen if we help it happen. Here is, I think, the core of our disagreement. Would it be just historically? Yes. Is there any chance that it will happen? No. Unlike Zionism. Zionism was something that was very difficult to do, but could be done, and we were determined to build ourselves in the way that made it possible. We can do a lot with ourselves. We can do relatively little with others, except preventing them from achieving what they want, namely our destruction. We are very potent, extremely potent, in breaking the attempts to destroy us. But in changing others, we have not been successful. We will not be successful. We had this hope in the Middle East that once they become less religious or more westernized or more this or more that, things will. No. This is what they are. This is a given. And if it will change one day, I'll be delighted. But we must work with the realities as they are.
Okay, thank you so much. And now, Moshe, what did you make of that? You've got also 8 minutes for a rebuttal.
Okay, first of all, I will not put aside the my negative response against using the term Palestinians. We have to realize we came back to our promised land after 2,000 years of exile when there was no other native nation taking the land of Israel instead of us. The whole argument against Israel is that there was a nation, there was a different nationality that took our place during these 2,000 years, and we lost our right to the land. And by using this lie, okay, we basically giving this argument to our enemies. There is no Palestinian nation. Their leaders admit it, and by saying there is a Palestinian nation, you're basically throwing the rug under your own feet and letting all the students in the universities demonstrate in London and demonstrate against us, scream from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, as Palestine has history, as there is a Palestinian nation, as there was a Palestinian kings in the 7th century somewhere around the land of Israel. This is nonsense, and that's why it's very, very important. Now, the second thing is to say that it did not only happen with the 12 million Germans. It happened since then, many occasions. Again, there was a tremendous exile of Syrians to Turkey, exile of Greeks in Cyprus to the other side of the millions of Ukrainians. It happens all the time, and this is the only solution. Dan says that it will never happen. Of course it will never happen if you'll never try it, which makes me think maybe we don't want it to happen. You know, President Trump offered it to us 2 years ago. He openly offered us this solution. The reason it didn't happen was not the Americans. It was us, the Israelis, who did not want it to happen. Okay, I can get into it if I had more time and prove it. More than that, right after the 7th of October, the Egyptians offered to accept hundreds of thousands of Arabs from the Gaza Strip in Sinai. Yes, Dan, I'll remind you. Later on, when they saw that we are not into that concept, they changed their mind. But at the beginning, the first 2-3 weeks, they offered it. Okay, it was published in the Egyptian media. And and the last thing is now there are states that's willing to accept them openly, like Somaliland and others. Not only that, they themselves, before the 7th of October, started to do that. In many TV programs, they said Arabs are leaving. There are going to be no Arabs in the Gaza Strip soon. There were jokes in Gaza about it. So I deeply I believe that the problem is that we, the Israelis, don't want them to leave. I'll tell you one sentence because I don't have a lot of time, but I'll tell you one sentence. I'll give you one sentence that summers it all. Okay. The Israeli, okay. I'm trying to translate it from Hebrew. The Israelis invented the Palestinians because they're afraid of their own Jewish identity. That is the core problem over here. We need this invented nation, Palestinian, to keep our invented identity, Israelis, instead of Jews. That's the core problem of the whole thing. As some of the intellectuals behind Oslo said, Oslo was not about peace. It was about an Israelism of the Israeli state instead of Judaism of the Israeli state. We need them here to keep our own Israeli identity, to make sure that the conflict remain a territorial conflict, which is false, and not what it really is, a religious conflict. And that's why the war never ends, because we're looking at it in, let's say, technical or secular terms as demographic, as a territorial conflict, but it's not. The Iranians have no territorial claims to the state of Israel. Still, they wanted to destroy us all. And the Hamas do not care about territory. What they're looking for is to kill the last Jews and conquer Al-Aqsa from a religious reasons. In order to come to a solution, we need to see reality in the right way.
Okay, Moshe, thank you so much for a really strong rebuttal there. Let me ask the question first of all to you, Professor Dan. Would you not accept, you're saying that there's no solution, but do you not accept that you're basically saying we have to continue the status quo, the current situation?
No.
Well, you're basically, you said that we have to accept there isn't a solution here. We have to continue the fact that there's not going to be necessarily a Palestinian state, but we're going to have a presence there. We're going to have to continually just, mow the lawn, as it were. And my question is this situation not going to become increased? Like, we're thinking about purely security terms, security management. Isn't this not becoming increasingly more and more untenable? More radicalization, more cycles of violence, more international pressure. You don't think so?
No. It's getting easier and easier over time. Look, we had a war with the establishment of the State of Israel, and 1% of the Jews were killed in the war. This is comparable to losing today 70,000 Jews in this war. We used to be a very weak, poor, fragile country with 6% of the Jewish people. We are today a regional power, the regional power, with 46% of the Jews. Very soon we will have the majority of the Jewish people because we don't assimilate and we have a lot of children. And it's much, 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 much easier every decade because we become much, much stronger than before. We defeated the Arab states to a point where for 50 years we have not had a regional war with the Arabs because they're afraid of us, because we are so strong. And they say so in their
October 7th
internal
was
discourse.
But
Yes,
October
and
7th was the worst massacre.
We had 2 difficult days. Yes. So what? It is
this wasn't just 2 difficult days. It was the worst massacre since one of the worst pogroms in our history.
Negligible compared with the problems we had in 48 and 56 and 67. And look, I was a soldier in the Israeli army, a reserve soldier in 1967 in the war. And we were afraid that this combination of all Arab states and bringing together all the potential of the Arab world against us could ruin Israel, okay? Today, we are immeasurably stronger than ever before. Every decade, we are stronger in every field that you can possibly imagine, except public opinion. Okay, now people don't love us as much, but they respect us much more. We are today, some people even say that we are a nuclear power, but we are certainly by far the only real regional power in the region. Egypt is not, Saudi Arabia is not, okay? Who else can Iran is being destroyed as we speak, and Israel is getting stronger and stronger. We used to be a poor country. We are a rich country. We used to be a country where we were afraid, the sophisticated part of us, that Ashkenazim and Sephardic Jews cannot cohabitate. Remember the elections of 1981. Since then, we've had a major stage of mixed marriages between Ashkenazi and Sephardic, and we have today more than 1 million children in Israel that don't know anymore if they're Sephardic or Ashkenazi. What are you talking about? Things are getting better and better. Now, Israelis whine? Yes. If you stop complaining in this country, they revoke your Israeli citizenship. Jews have a genetic problem. If a Jew doesn't feel bad, he doesn't feel good. Okay. I mean, I understand the Israelis have this twist. Okay, let them kvetch.
Okay,
but
and go for it.
So saying, is it tenable? It's getting better and better, easier and easier, and idiots who speak about the 7th of October in terms of the Holocaust are belittling the Holocaust. Okay?
Well,
you don't. Well, how can you even bring it up? Even for propaganda.
I'm not even wasn't necessarily comparing it to the Holocaust, but just, I mean, if you think about just pogroms throughout history, it is a highly significant massacre in Jewish history.
Yes, but after the pogrom, you're still left alone. And here you have you know what the Americans say, that the Israelis have the second strongest air force in the world. Okay? The Americans say, the Secretary of War and the commander of CENTCOM. Are you comparing this with the helplessness of the Jewish people? Okay, kvetch if you want. If it makes you happy, complain.
Okay,
but for a moment, look at reality.
Okay, and Moshe, I'd throw the same question back at you in the other way. If in terms of what's tenable, in terms of international legitimacy, isolation, risks to Israel, your proposal for annexation, potential remigration, expulsion, could that not be more risky, more endangering to Israel's future, given the potential risk of blowback? Even if you say other countries have done it, past or present, the fact of the matter is the world holds Israel to double standards.
Well, first of all, as I mentioned, it was offered to you by Donald Trump. Donald Trump, when he offered the annexation of all the Arabs in Gaza, basically gave you the answer. He gave you the answer. The problem is not an international pressure or the fact that America will not let you when America itself offered that solution. So this is not a.
Why do you think Israel turned it down, Moshe?
Exactly because of what I said before. There's a deep answer. The deep answer is that in order to keep our secular Israeli identity, we need a partner. You see, there's a mask party over here. The Jew comes to the party with a mask of Israeli, and the Arab comes to the party with a mask of Palestinian, and both sides are trying to play a game, okay, that suits the concepts of the West, the concept of territorial argument, demographic argument, normal argument, but it's not about that. It's a spiritual argument, and as long as we try to solve this argument with the wrong tools, it will not be solved. Now, I have to say something about the 7th of October that you mentioned before. I absolutely agree with Dan and with his optimism about the amazing process that's happening in Israel and the direction. I'm very optimistic, and the direction is great. Yet, at the 7th of October was not a little, bite.
A blip. Yeah.
The 7th of October. At the 7th of October, Israel was at a real risk for its existence. All needed to happen is the Hezbollah will join forces, the Iranians will join forces, and with what we had over here, it could have been a destruction of the state of Israel. They could continue to the air forces and so on. Now, of course, there's nothing to compare between the 7th of October and the Holocaust. With that, I agree with that. But at these particular hours, when they did what they did, okay, it was a day of Holocaust. Not 6 years of a Holocaust, but in a small perspective, in a small piece of land, in a very minor time. It was exactly like it has all the ingredients of Holocaust, okay? And we should always remember. I think it's very dangerous if we will not remember that. With that, even though we're getting stronger and stronger, the danger is always there, okay? And when we forget who we are, and when we losing our unity, because what led to the 7th of October was the 2 years before. What happened on Yom Kippur 7 days before in Israel is the fact that pilots in Israel said they're not going to fly anymore, and that encouraged the Hamas to start that war. If we will not go to the basic justification that unite us all and go back and hold the very basic reason why the state of Israel was established and what is the continuous justification to its existence, the danger is definitely there. Nothing is promised. Nothing is promised.
Okay. Well, thank you both for a very hearty and compelling discussion for part one. And I now want to zoom out to just more broadly, because there are obviously deeper undertones to both sides of your arguments. And as I said at the beginning of this discussion, I've from listening to a bunch of Professor Dan's talks, talking to him as well in previous discussions, from reading your book, Moshe, and other content that you've put out, you clearly have different visions for how Israel should be, how it should present itself to the world, how it should exist as a national government, society, what model it should have. And I wanted to now move to that as the second part of the discussion. Seeing as Moshe, you just finished speaking that last there, should we go back to Professor Dan? I want to give you 12 minutes to set out what you think needs to be the North Star that Israel has to, look at and head towards as it continues to foster its identity, its national identity, and what will make it most viable moving forward. Just a moment. Have you ever heard someone say, "I've got no problem with Judaism or Jews, it's Israel I've got a problem with"? Well, we've just created our most important documentary yet, called Zionism and Judaism, The False Separation. Have a watch of the trailer, and if you want to watch the full thing, just click on the link below in the video description. This one's important. I'm not against Judaism, I'm just against Zionism.
It's not Jewish, it's Zionism.
Yeah. Judaism and Zionism are completely separate.
Judaism is a faith, Israel is a state.
You can be Jewish without being a Zionist.
Zionism and Judaism is totally diametrically opposed.
I'm sure you've heard this before, from protesters, from politicians, from even well-meaning people trying to navigate the Israel-Palestine debate. But I'm here to tell you that this separation is complete nonsense. It's a comfortable lie. The kind of lie that sounds intelligent but collapses the moment you actually open this book, the Torah, the Bible, and study Judaism on its own terms. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to tackle this myth head on. We'll actually look inside the Torah and see how in the very first book, Genesis, there's no mention of law or religion. It's all centered on the promise of a specific land to a specific nation. We'll trace how Judaism, not modern politics, but Judaism itself, is structured around one obsessive, relentless, undeniable claim: the land of Israel belongs to the Jews. We'll reveal why the building of a nation in the land of Israel is an indispensable part of the project of Judaism. Why Judaism is not a religion, it's the divine project of a nation in a land. We'll discover how the Torah preemptively answered the colonization accusation that wouldn't fully materialize for another 3,000 years. We'll explore why, if the land is so central, Jews had to spend thousands of years in global exile. We'll unpack what Zionism actually means, and how anti-Zionism doesn't just contradict Israeli policy, it contradicts the fundamental architecture of Judaism itself. For some people, this is going to be uncomfortable viewing, but by the end, we'll prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Judaism and Zionism are inseparable. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.
Well, I think that the way we started, and we were most of the time, first of all, proved itself to be very successful. And second, constantly we have changed, we should change. The question is in which direction we should change. We started out as a secular movement. Had we listened to the rabbis, Zionism would never have happened. Zionism is essentially a secular approach to Judaism, a very deep commitment to Jewish identity, but not necessarily the religious approach, and certainly not the halachic approach. And Israel was established by people who rejected Judaism as being exclusively a religion and emphasizing Judaism being also a peoplehood. And by the way, we became a people before Matan Torah. So we should see this perspective. And I take this history of the Old Testament very seriously, not as a religious book written by God, but I have adopted it as my past. This is my past, my Jewish identity. By the way, it is a matter of choice. It came to me late in life that beyond being born a Jew, I am also extremely committed to my Jewish identity, and it is not a religious identity. Let me give you an extreme example here that will be a major problem for Moshe, I suppose. I insist on a Seder on Pesach, where I insist on reading the Haggadah without leaving out a syllable. I insist on having chametz, because I don't need to be reminded why our forefathers did not have time for their bread to become prepared, because I was there. בכל דור ודור חייב אדם לראות עצמו כאילו הוא יצא ממצרים. And I know that Moses could not have pulled it off without me. I was there. Without me, he would have had a problem with the Red Sea. Okay? And I feel that as if it is really my personal history, I've decided to adopt the Jewish past to be my past. I'm trying to commit to the Jewish present in a way that will strengthen the Jewish people. And I worry and I try to work towards the Jewish future. My Jewish identity is extremely strong. I know the Jewish sources very, very well. You know, I haven't been to synagogue in 50 years, but a few years ago, I was stuck in Sofia, Bulgaria on Yom Kippur, so I went to the synagogue. The only person in the synagogue, there were 150 people there who knew all the texts by heart, was me. I love these texts. They are very deeply a part of me. My definition of being a Jew is a person whose grandchildren will be Jews, of choice. And this is what is happening to me. They want to be Jews. They want to be very strongly associated to the biblical history, to the symbolic part, without the religious part. Now, if people need the religious part for their Jewish identity, fine. For me, these are crutches. I mean, I can do without it. My Jewish identity is so strong, I don't need the religion. I can enjoy reading the Bible, eating shrimp and then schinken. I don't care. This is not my Jewish. When I am focusing on Zionism as a product of Jewish peoplehood, I'm saying religious people are welcome. The Mizrahi was part of the Zionist movement. By the way, not the Haredim. You know that I think the Haredim are the number one enemy of the future of the Jewish people. The parasites, the primitive parasites who represent the hardcore of the Haredi life in Israel, the way of life in Israel, are the enemies of the Jewish people. But Jews who have a strong religious commitment, I welcome. They're friends of mine. They've made strong contributions in the past. They're making it in the future. They're part of my solidarity. I feel a very strong solidarity with them. I want a Jewish state in this sense of a commitment to the Jewish people. And by the way, including the willingness to be alone, including the willingness to be rejected by others because I'm a Jew. By the way, if God forbid I were a Jew in exile, I think I would eat kosher. Not because I think that it has any religious significance, but because I want to say I'm different than you are. There is something about me that is different than you are. I would, of course, look, I sing, let me perhaps do that as a last contribution, particularly for Moshe to understand. On Hanukkah, for 8 days, I sing all the songs of Hanukkah, and I love them all. But I always start with the basic song, Anu Nos'im Lapidim. אנו נושאים לפידים בלילות אפלים, זורחים השבילים מתחת רגלינו, וכל אשר לב לו הצמא לאור, יישא את עיניו וליבו אלינו לאור ויבוא. נס לא קרה לנו, פח שמן לא מצאנו, בעמק הלכנו, ההרה עלינו, מעיינות אורות גנוזים גילינו, בסלע חפרנו אדם ויהי אור. The miracle is that the Almighty brought us. And we are the miracle. We are the miracle, not the canister that lasted for 8 days. We, the people who are committed to Jewish identity, who consider that the only collective identity, that we are the miracle.
Okay, and just before, because there's still a little bit more time in your opening remarks, just specifically around the question of do we base ourselves on the model of, because you spoke about this a bit in our prior chat, should we think of Israel as a Western country, a democracy? You spoke about Enlightenment values. What do you see as the key governmental and values?
I want to be a national liberal state, or in other words, Yehudit ודמוקרטית, Jewish and democratic. There is a tension between the two, but there is a tension between all good values that you go about. And I want the freedom given to us by the Enlightenment, and I want the commitment, even the tribalism, given to us by our Jewish identity. I think the greatest achievement of the State of Israel is the combination of having the freedom and the individualism of the West with the warmth and the family values and the commitment to children and to understanding of our past and to understanding of our deeply rooted Jewish identity at the same time. I don't want to go to the European extreme that is nihilistic. I don't want the Arab extreme or the Haredi extreme. They're more or less the same, who are oppressive. I want the freedom, and in this freedom to choose the solidarity, to choose the commitment to our identity, not to have a universal identity, to say our contribution to universal culture is through our specific Jewish culture. It is not, we are not lost individuals in a universal reality. We are Jews, and we are coming there as Jews and bringing the blessing of what Jewish history can give us. And if they want it, fine, and if they don't, I don't care, because my Jewish identity is so strong.
Okay, great. Moshe?
Well, Dan is definitely a 100% Jew, because only a real Jew challenge God in the way Dan is doing, just like Moses, just like Moshe Rabbeinu, just like Avraham Avinu. I mean, so to say that I insist on having chametz on Leila Seder is a kind of Jewish behavior. So
I agree.
So
yeah.
That's fine with me. That's fine with me. Do it the way you want, no problem. Just seriously speaking, what you really represent, Dan, is a kind of dinosaur that's still left from the 30s, from the pioneers of the 30s and the 40s. By the way, my family came here during the first Aliyah in the 19th century, very religious, established the Metula and Mishmar HaYarden. My great great-uncle was the first Mukhtar, as they call it, of Metula. My grandfather was the first baby born in Metula. All religious people, by the way. All religious people. They did not know what Haredi means, okay? They were all Chabad, by the way. You can call them Haredim. They came here to the land of Israel before Herzl started even to think of Zionism. So the spiritual energy, okay, faithful energy, were the energies behind Zionism. I believe you'll agree with me that without that, Zionism could not succeed. I definitely agree that the State of Israel needed also the energies of secular energies to be created. Very interesting things happen. I wrote about it in my book. You invited to read it as well. But what you represent today is not the situation in Israel anymore. Israel is moving towards its identity in the most fast way. in secular high schools in Tel Aviv, okay, the way students in Tel Aviv and Ramat Gan that comes from total secular families, the way they show their rebellions against the previous generation is by putting tefillin, putting tzitzit, and they're not keeping Shabbos, and maybe they're not eating kosher. And you see how these two identities, the Israeli identity and the Jewish identity, are melting one into each other in the most beautiful way. And there is no need to rebel anymore against the rich culture that we inherit from our parents. But if you want to keep on doing that, go ahead. I have no problem with it. But I will go further and say the following. The head of the Israeli Air Force in the Yom Kippur War was Benny Peled, was his name. And Benny Peled, if I remember right, was a member of the Canaanite movement. I don't know if you're aware of this movement, Oli, but during the 30s, yes. Oh, so you read it already. Okay. These intellectuals, very serious intellectuals, okay, took the concept of creating a new identity to the Jewish nationality that is not based on the commandment to God, okay, on the covenant between the people and God in Mount Sinai, and therefore we are a nation like all the nation. Our covenant is with the soil of the land, and because they could not connect themselves to Judaism anymore, they said we are Canaanites. And after the Yom Kippur War, Benny Peled said the following: we thought that we created a state, but what we really created was a shtetl with an air force. Now, then see the Air Force, which is today is much more amazing than in Yom Kippur War 50 years ago, and he see the technology, and he see our strength in our economy, and says everything is okay. But I think then do not realize what Benny Peled understood. We're talking about mentality. You can invent yourself as a nation that don't need God anymore to remain its nationality, okay? But it doesn't hold. After 2 decades, when we got to the Yom Kippur War, Benny Peled realized that we did not create this nationality that we want, and our conscience went back to a conscience of a community. You know what the difference between a nation and a community in exile? A sovereign nation in its land, and a galut way of thinking of a community in exile. A nation win the wars by annex the land, by capture the land, throw away his enemy. That's the goal of a nation. That's what we did. That's what we did in 1948, when this new nationality still exists in us, in our conscience. We took the Arabs of Majdal, threw them away, and created the city of Ashkelon. We took the Arabs of Isdud, threw them away, and created the city of Ashdod. We took the Arabs of Sheikh Munis, threw them away, and created the north of Tel Aviv. That's how a nation acts. But when we lost this concept of nationality, because this false nationality can hold only for a short period of time, we become, without noticing, a community again, a shtetl. And it doesn't matter how strong we are. And then, when we get the 7th of October, we act just like a shtetl. What a shtetl do when the Cossacks come and do a pogrom, as you mentioned. Okay, they scream to the police. This time it was Trump, it was Biden. Okay, please send the Gerald Ford to save us. We that fought against 5 Arab countries in 48 could not deal with the Hamas. Okay, in 2003, and waited for the Americans to come help us. And what else? And what else the community does? It's doing pidyon shvuim, negotiating about the prisoners. Okay, so the whole mentality, when we did not change on time, when we're not connected to our deep national identity, this identity that we celebrate on Leila Seder, this unique national identity that is not based on the covenant with the soil, but on the covenant with God. Okay, we came into Israel as a nation already. We did not create the nation here. Okay, the first line on the Megillat Ha'atzmaut, the independent chart, is not true. Okay, not in the land of Israel the Jewish nation was created. Okay, it was created in Mount Sinai and even before in Egypt. By that I definitely agree with Dan. Okay, when we disconnect ourselves from our unique identity, we slowly but surely lost our sense of nationality and became, as Benny Pellet said, a shtetl with an air force. But the optimistic side is that these days, today, okay, with the war in Iran, it's starting to change. It's starting to change. We're developing a conscience of a regional power. And I believe that when the tools that Dan described, and I definitely agree that being created here will meet the original sources, original spirit, original message of the Jewish nation for 3,000 years, that will bring us to the Geula Hashlema, as we all looking for. The way I see this Geula Hashlema is Israel as original power that radiates the values of identity and liberty at the same time. Judaism is about these two pillars, identity and liberty.
Moshe, just before I head back to Professor Dan, he said that he wants to see Israel as a Jewish state and a democratic state. From what I've read in your book, you seem to have some concerns and hesitations with the phenomenon of Israeli Arabs being in government in Israel. What's your particular view here of the kind of governmental setup that you think Israel should adopt?
The additional words "and the democratic," Jewish and the democratic, Yehudit ve'demokratit, was added to the Israeli identity just during the 90s. It did not appear on the independent chart. No one spoke about it before. Israel is not a Jewish and a democratic state, just as England is not English and a democratic state. England is the British state, and as Churchill said, democracy is very bad system, but I do not know a better system than that. Okay, it is just a way of ruling. Okay, and Israel is a Jewish state, period. And the way it works and the way it should work, of course, is according to the democratic concept. But when you're taking the system and level it up as part of the goal that for the Israeli existence, you're destroying the state of Israel. No palmachnik, okay, that eating shrimps and on Yom Kippur, doing 1948. fought for Jerusalem, for example, and screamed for the democratic state. Our dream was to have a Jewish state after 2,000 years of exile. Yes, we believe it should be run democratically, but there's no these two concepts, the Jewish state and democracy, do not stand on the same level at all. We lifted democracy to the same level of the Jewish identity of the state in order to destroy the Jewish state. This is what happened.
Can I ask just again?
And by the way, Aaron Barak, who basically stood behind this evilness, okay, said it openly. He said it openly. That this is what it is. It's a democratic state. That's what he said.
Can I just ask, just to clarify this, just if you can just answer this briefly, I'm sure we can flesh it out more in the conversation section. But what do you believe should be the place of Israeli Arabs in Israel?
The Israeli Arabs that observe, willing to accept the fact that Israel is a Jewish state, meaning all its citizens have equal rights as individuals, but as a nation, the land of Israel is a nation home only for the Jews. When they accept that, no problem. They can be a part of Israel and flourish the land together with us. Once they starting to long to look for creation, changing the identity of the state, and basically, and they saying it openly, for us, it's not a Jewish state, it's a Palestinian state. We are Palestinian Arabs. Basically, they're trying to create a new nationality over here. They try to make the land of Israel a national home for another nation. Once you do that, you're actually declaring war on the Jewish state.
So, for example, would you ban some of the Arab or Islamist parties, political parties, from being able to run elections if you were prime minister?
By the way, this is the Israeli law today. If you do not accept the existence of Israel as a Jewish state, you cannot run for Knesset.
Okay.
But of course, the Supreme Court let them again and again do that.
Okay. Professor Dan, back to you now. You've got 8 minutes just to react to what Moshe said and any further comments.
A few comments to what Moshe said. I would not identify Jews behaving as a nation with the expulsion of Arabs. If it is necessary, for instance, in Lud and Ramle, when they rose up after they capitulated, yes, I'm very strongly for it. But this is not the yardstick that we should use for being a nation. Second, I would not identify a religious way of life and keeping the halakha with God. You don't have to be atheistic if you don't live according to halakha. So I would be careful here with the definitions. One thing that is blatantly untrue is that America saved us from Hamas. We didn't wait for the Americans to save us from Hamas. We went there and we broke them and we killed them, and the Americans tried to prevent them from killing them and stop the war in the beginning of 24. And I'm delighted we rejected the Americans, and against the Biden administration, we continued the war, we took Rafah. Against their will, we invaded Lebanon. Against their will, we acted very harshly in Beirut and killed Nasrallah and his band and so on. So, do we want American assistance? Yes. But have we done more than any other nation to defend ourselves without American soldiers, without American help? Yes. So, I don't have any problem there. Concerning democracy, an Israel that will not be democratic will not have the Jews. The Jews will not live in an Israel that is not democratic. Let me put it this way. My kind of Jews, a kind of country where I cannot live, will not exist. Okay? Because it will be as primitive, as retarded as Yemen and as Sudan, with the ultra-Orthodox perhaps, but it will not be a democratic state is as necessary as a Jewish state. Now, you start with a Jewish state. Yes, this is the foundation. But once you have a Jewish state, this Jewish state must be democratic. And Ben-Gurion understood it in spite of the fact that he could have had the privilege of not being so democratic. Okay, because remember, the Jews who came from Europe came from the armpit of Europe, from Eastern Europe. They didn't come from the great liberal centers. But also these people with a Bolshevik background knew that in order to have a state that the Jewish people can be proud of, that the Jews want to live in, that the Jews want to stay in, that the Jews want to come to, it must also be democratic. Now, of course, you shouldn't let democracy undermine the existence of the state. This is called self-defending democracy. You have it even in European countries. You have it in Israel. I agree with you that we've had a judicial system that went a bit too far in the other direction. I see the present government going a bit too far in the opposite direction. I think that we can all find a compromise that will work, where you don't allow Arabs or others or progressives to use democracy in order to destroy the Jewish and democratic state. We should be very careful not to let them do it. And surprisingly, we have exactly the same attitude about Israeli Arabs. Once Israeli Arabs accept that alongside equality on the personal level, when it comes to the national level, this is only the homeland of the Jewish people, if they accept this without conditions, this must be a starting point, this must be a precondition, then they can be in the government, they can be everywhere. By the way, there are Arabs who accept it in the Israeli army. I recently had a lieutenant colonel, an Arab lieutenant colonel as my student, and I was delighted to see that he could serve in the Israeli army and to say to me in very clear terms that he realizes that this is the homeland of the Jewish people, then you can be an Arab. I mean, by the way, this is what the Druze have done. The Druze are non-Jews, Arabic-speaking. They are a part of my solidarity ring. For me, the Druze are my brothers, and the ultra-Orthodox who don't serve in the army are not. Okay? So, yes, you can be an equal rights citizen in the Jewish state, provided you accept that it's a Jewish state. Concerning the Canaanites, this was a very serious ideology that I completely reject, and I'm delighted that they became a ridiculous episode of a cult. Their impact on Israel is absolutely zero, and I'm delighted it is absolutely zero. So let us recognize that some of the dangers that we both identify, namely the progressives and the Canaanites, have today practically no hold, even in Tel Aviv. Living in Tel Aviv, I know that very well, that even here, they're not really a danger.
Got it. Okay, Moshe, your response as well.
First of all, I'm delighted that, seriously speaking, that Dan agree with this approach to the Israeli Arabs. That and I think that it was worth it, this discussion, just to find to hear that.
Let me perhaps, Moshe, here is a book I've written on the subject, 860 pages, that proves what they have tried to do here. Okay? So this is something we need to know about, and this book shows it.
I think that it's amazing that even though we are coming from definitely from two different corners, two different dimensions and way of looking at the whole conflict, we coming to the same conclusion about this concept, and maybe we should come out with this with a paper that we both sign on, because I believe, and maybe you will agree with me about that too, that the problem with we having inside Israel, the conflict that we have inside in Israel, and definitely with the Arabs inside of Israel, is not in any way less dangerous than the danger that we have aside. And just to give you an example for that, okay, we losing sovereignty in major parts of Israel, in the Negev and the Galil.
In the Negev, primarily.
And also in the Galil, by the way. I see it with my own eyes. We're losing it because this very simple understanding that we both put here on the table is not something that Israel can come openly and say. And I feel ashamed that we have a right government, more or less for 30 years, and in the last 4 years, total right government, okay, al maleh maleh as they call it in Israel, and yet cannot come with these simple facts. Israel is the homeland of the Jewish nation and only of the Jewish nation. On the individual level, whoever accepts that, either is a Jewish or not, is welcome to be with us, to be with us and serve with us and enjoy all the benefits that the Israeli democracy gives. But whoever is not accepting it should find his future in a better place for him, or give up his citizenship. Okay, this is very simple to explain and to understand. And it was worthwhile. I have to tell you, it was worthwhile. I'm surprised. I didn't know. I did not read your 800 pages book. I'm sorry, and I'm very happy to hear it from you.
Moshe, it just to specify as well, when we're talking about Israeli Arabs, I guess one of the things that should be specified as well, that of course where most of the problems is within the Arab Muslim community specifically, because of course you have Druze, you have Arab Christians, Arab atheists. Do you have any sense of what percentage of Israeli Arab Muslims within Israel are hostile to the very Jewish nature of Israel's nation stated?
Okay, so let me start with a short story. When I was the deputy speaker of the Knesset, hopefully I'll be there soon again. I'm running, as you know. Another deputy speaker. We were a few deputy speakers. I became friend with a Knesset member named Hamed Amar. Hamed Amar was a Druze Knesset member. And we became friends. And one day I asked Hamed, I told him, tell me something. When my nephew from Australia wants to come to Israel, he doesn't speak the language, know nothing about Israel, immediately he gets an Israeli citizenship. If your relative will come to Israel, Israel will reject giving him a Israeli ID. What do you feel about it? I asked him in private, as a friend. And he said to me the following. He said, I have no problem with that, because I know Israel is a Jewish state, and I want it to be a Jewish state. And I know that if Israel will lose its Jewish identity, it will not exist. And I want it to exist for me because I feel good here. I live a good life here. That's what he told me. Now, the problem is that his religion was the Druze religion, which is a community religion. There's no nationalism between the Druze, wherever they live in different nations, between different nations. That's their culture. That's their belief. This is not the situation with the Islam. By the way, also not with Christianity, but put this aside a minute. Islam is a religion that cannot accept any non-Muslim sovereignty in the world, including London, and definitely not in the Middle East and not in the Holy Land. And therefore, I will be very suspicious if a Muslim will come and say, I accept the fact that the land of Israel, the Holy Land of Israel, is the homeland of the Jewish nation. Definitely, I will not see him saying that in public. I think with the Arab Muslims, we have a very, very serious problem. I am not sure it can be achieved.
Okay, interesting. And now I just want to pose some questions to both of you. If there's anything in particular that one of you said to another, feel free to pick up on that as well. Professor Dan, when Israel is speaking to the world and justifying our right to be there, what we're doing, they always question Israel's right to exist. But beyond that, our actions, our military actions, how do you think we should present ourselves? How do you think we should be justifying ourselves? On what grounds?
Let me first make a short comment about what you asked Moshe and what Moshe said.
Sure.
Unfortunately, even if you have a majority of Arabs in Israel who want to integrate, their elite has adopted the profoundly flawed approach of the Palestinian national movement, where your pride depends on negating Jewish existence. And therefore, almost all the Israeli Arab elite, and this is why this 860 pages book is worth reading, signed one of four documents saying that not only was Israel born in sin, but it exists in sin. Because Israel is a product of a Western colonial project, and not only was it born in colonialism, it exists in colonialism. Namely, a Jewish state is inherently unacceptable. And Arabs in Israel want to be Palestinians. By the way, this includes Christians. For instance, Azmi Bashara, one of the most disgusting people and very sophisticated persons in Israel, was a Catholic. Is a Catholic, okay? He doesn't live in Israel. He fled for a good reason. So the problem is that even if you're part of the elite, not only of the political elite, the overwhelming majority of this elite, if they want to have a prominent position among Israeli Arabs, they must negate the Jewish state, and they will cheat us in many ways so that they can show the face to their own community as if they are these heroes who are working against the Jewish nature of the state of Israel. So as a community, I think that we have a very serious problem. Concerning your more specific question, I think Israel should present itself to the world by saying the following. A, we're here. B, we're a Jewish state. You don't like it, you're our enemy. You accept this as a premise, as a beginning, that you cannot even question. Then we can discuss Israeli policies, and if you think this is right or this is wrong. But A, this is what we are. B, if they try to threaten our existence, we will break their face and we will destroy our enemies, whether you like it or not. And the problem we're having at the moment is that we are not only fighting hostile countries like, in Europe, Ireland and Spain and Norway and Belgium and so on. We also have as enemies today the New York Times and the BBC and CNN and the United Nations and the International Court in The Hague, every international human rights organizations, Amnesty International and so on, because they're dominated by one of two groups. Either by Western radicals, namely the progressives, and the progressives are the number one enemies of liberalism, like the fascists are the number one enemy of patriots. The ultimate enemy of patriotism is fascism. The ultimate enemy of liberalism is progressivism. And when the progressives dominate Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, they're enemies of Israel. When third world countries that are either autocratic or dictatorial or barbarian dominate the United Nations because they are the majority, then they have prostituted these organizations. Okay, the United Nations is a prostituted organization because the majority of members of the United Nations are repulsive nations by democratic yardsticks, by liberal yardsticks. And you have an organization where one state, one vote, from countries where you don't have one person, one vote. So they will not teach me about democracy or about human rights. Okay? So when we present ourselves, we can say, here are the ground rules. We are there. You want to question our existence? Join our enemies. Stand in line. We have many enemies. We will either disregard you or, if we must, break you. Okay? And if you are willing to accept these two things, A, that we are a Jewish state, and B, that we have a God-given right to defend ourselves, that doesn't depend on what you call international law, we will defend ourselves. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. And then you can speak. And let me tell you something from my own experience. I spent a lot of my time in the last 6 decades traveling in the world and speaking to prominent people, national security advisors, ministers, members of parliament, leaders of parties, and so on. And I always start from this, and very often I have very fruitful discussions, including in the Arab world. I teach in the Diplomatic Academy of the United Arab Emirates. I teach them courses of the Middle East. I just came back from Tokyo speaking to all the top people who are the assistants of the new government in Japan. I'm going in 2 weeks to Germany to speak to the leaders of Germany in different categories. I'm traveling around the world speaking to people, including, newspaper editors and so on. And this is how I start the discussion. And once they realize that there is nothing they can do about it, they can either accept it or become irrelevant. Most people who don't like us are irrelevant. They cannot even hurt us. And one last comment, and if you want, at the expense of any other time that you give me later. I was speaking to certain European ambassadors in the United States, and I was telling them, with Europe, we have a problem, but no dilemma. We have a problem because European countries can hurt us, and they can hurt us in a way that really hurts. We have no dilemma because listening to you is not an option. Had we listened to Europe, Saddam Hussein would have had nuclear weapons. Had we listened to Europe, Assad would have had nuclear weapons. And one of the ambassadors then in the break told me, I don't understand the difference between a problem and a dilemma. And I told him something that you may not want to use and you may want to edit it out. I told him, Let me tell you the difference between the two. If I cannot get a young woman into bed, I have a problem. And believe me, for me, it's a very serious problem. But if I'm in bed with a gorgeous woman and a homosexual man, who do I turn my back to? That's a dilemma. And then he understood. Okay? Now, you may want to edit it out of your podcast, but with the Europeans, I have no dilemma, because listening to them is not an option. Because unlike the French, I have in my vocabulary more than collaborate and capitulate. This is more or less the political dictionary of the French. And I'm not willing to go in this direction.
And just before I get to Moshe, I actually do want to ask you just something briefly, because I know that this will be part of, I suspect, what Moshe will say. I'm sure Moshe, as I do, don't disagree with anything you just said there about our rights and justification. But Moshe, I think I can see that he has a third temple lapel on his jacket. And he believes that it's important, and I showed you as well, that my views as well in our prior discussion, that Israel also explains our story and our justification from a divine right perspective, from a biblical perspective, that God gave us this land. Just briefly, just what's your view on the value of saying that?
I think that.
Sorry, I'm asking Professor Dan before we get to Moshe.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look, I recall Jewish history, 3,000 years of Jewish history in Jerusalem. My God can be relevant to me. It cannot be relevant to others. Okay? The fact that I believe in this or that, or don't believe in this or that, is not relevant. But I would be very careful about the temple. And by the way, I think in Moshe's terms, I'm now quoting the word of God. Mali rov zivchechem. In other words, I don't have a problem with God. I have a problem with his ground crew, okay? With the rabbis that in Israel are usually corrupt and primitive, with people who use religion for power and manipulate primitive people. So for me, it is the symbol of the temple that is more important than the physical temple. I don't have holy places. I have holy ideas. For me, the Jewish people in its ancestral homeland is holy. For me, having a building that represents it is meaningless. But I respect the fact that for others it is important.
Okay, Moshe, so now to you, the same question. How should Israel be framing itself, justifying its right to be, its right to exist on the world stage? You've argued that we should be saying this, biblical justification.
Well, first of all, I have to reject this approach that put all the rabbis and the rabbinical and all the Haredim in corrupt and evil and primitive places. This is not my language, and I, Dan, I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something from my heart. Okay, I speak to you from Karnei Shomron. Basically, at least half of the population here are Orthodox that went to the war on the 7th of October together with their rabbis. We have the same amount of new graves in a military zone of the cemetery here in Karnei Shomron, new graves, than the city of Herzliya. These religious people, religious pioneers, okay, that flourished the land in Judea and Samaria and all over the country, were the first one, more than other ranks of population in Israel, to go and fight and say, before the official army and the official leadership did what they did. We have here in this cemetery a father of 10 children, that put everything aside. I think he was a rabbi in the yeshiva here. He put everything aside, went to war, where he could easily, officially, legally, could have not be there. He wanted to be there, and he's buried there together with, so to speak, one of his students, which is my grandson. Okay, so with all due respect, we're talking here. We have to be more careful with the language we use. Okay, so now going back to the subject, this symbol of the temple that you see on my jacket symbolize, you know what it symbolize, Oli? It symbolize our nationality. I believe you already passed when you read my book, okay? Which, by the way, Dan, it's on Amazon right now. It's not 800 pages. It's only 300 something pages. I bring in this book an amazing story, which I think explains the whole thing of the temple. Okay, when the Balfour Declaration, as I mentioned before, was given to us because of a spiritual longing of Balfour and his friends, the leaders in London, and they said the follow, and it's mentioned in this book of Barbara Tuchman, by the way, giving the whole story. They said there was a big despair after World War I from the Enlightenment achievements. There was an expectation at the optimistic 19th century that the Enlightenment period of time, Enlightenment concept, will bring prosperity and will lead the world, the nations, to the end of wars and to a new era. And there was a big despair. And then Balfour says, maybe when the children of the prophets will go back to the hills of Galilee and Judea, and the language of the Bible will be heard in the land of Israel, a new message of life, justice, and faith will be spread to the entire world. And that was the optimistic way of thinking that gave us the Balfour Declaration, that because of that, we got, at the end, the State of Israel. Now, when they got the mandate, when the Brits got the mandate from the League of Nations in 1922, at the beginning, that's what they wanted to do, to create a Jewish state. And at those years, they let an architect, a very religious architect, by the way, named Yaakov Yehuda, I tell the whole story in the book, to go to the Temple Mount and listen to this, to start measuring the Temple Mount for the ability to rebuild Beit HaMikdash, rebuild the temple, because they understood that what it means, Jewish nationality. Now this Yaakov Yehuda goes to New York at the early 30s, and he shows in New York a symbol of the temple that he built. One second, I'm looking for the picture. Here. This is a picture from the 30s. This is, let me see. This is Yaakov Yehuda over there, showing in a New York exhibition the building of Beit HaMikdash. The same guy who got salary from the Brits to go and measure the Temple Mount. And Albert Einstein is coming to this exhibition to see the building that he built, what he built, and he's getting very excited. And he says, this is the symbol of the Jewish nationality. This is what Albert Einstein says. So why I'm telling you all that story? Because for me, not only for me, this building represents our nationality. It's not a religious thing. It's our cultural thing. That represents our nationality and our positive message to the entire humanity. That same message that because of the expectation for it, we got the Balfour Declaration that the Israeli state was developed from. Now, just two little things I have to mention after what Dan said. First of all, Dan mentioned Azmi Bishara. Well, Azmi Bishara, a very anti-Semite Arab, Christian Arab, as Dan mentioned, was interviewed many years ago by Yaron London, who was a famous TV guy in Israel. And you can find, if you just put the words Azmi Bishara and Yaron London on YouTube, you'll hear it all. Okay, it's on YouTube. And he's saying that there is no Palestinian nation. And he's saying it again and again. Okay? Just to hear it from this air. He was a Knesset member. He was the biggest enemy. And he's saying there is no Palestinian nation. So why should we continue saying that? And the second thing is, when I was only 2 weeks in the Knesset, the first time I got into the Knesset, I became a Knesset member, an Arab Knesset member, very vocal Arab Knesset member named Isawi Frej asked to speak with me. And Isawi Frej, he's a very serious guy, intellectual, and we sat behind the Knesset, the benches over there, and he said to me, this land of Israel that you're talking about all the time, what are the borders of this land? He asked me. So I told him, look, Isawi, I'm a very modest man. From the Euphrates to the Nile, not more than that. So he said to me, and who said so? So I pointed to the ceiling of the Knesset and I said, God said so. So before I even took my hand down, Isawi Frej told me, you're right. Also in our Quran it says that the land of Israel belongs to you, to the Jews, and with you, Moshe, I will manage. But he continued, you're a liar. I told him, why am I a liar? He said, because you're not a Zionist. With the Zionists, I will always have a war. I told him, you have to explain yourself. Why, with me, that I just told you that the land of Israel is from the Nile to the Euphrates, you'll say, you said, you will manage. And with those Zionists that always willing to give you half of the land, you will always have war. And I continued it. I told him if Ben Gurion would have declared the state of Israel only in the borders of the Tel Aviv Museum, you, Isawi, would go with an axe and kill everybody in the museum. He said, true. I told him, so please explain to me. I don't understand. Why with me you'll manage and with the Zionists, by the way, I consider myself a Zionist. Don't misunderstand me. But I told him, explain what you said. He said, you see, you're a real Jew. You're coming in the name of God. You're coming with a culture that and the language I understand here. Those Zionists that came from Europe are not real Jews. That are just new colonialists that came to my region. With them, there'll always be war. Now, the truth is that what he represents by what he said openly is exactly what I meant let's look at the face of the problem. It is not a territorial war. It's not a demographic problem. Okay, it's a cultural, spiritual. When we will stick to our identity, which means this building, when the answer to the Al-Aqsa flood, the way they call the war, what is the Al-Aqsa? Har HaBayit, the place of the temple. The answer to it, when our politicians, when our prime minister will go with that, not with a yellow ribbon looking for mercy, but will go with that. This is our nationality. This is our pride. This is the core for our justification in the land. They will accept us. And just last word, you talked about progressivism. This book, you have to read it. You wrote 800 pages. I wrote 3 or more, but it's all dealing with progressivism in our current situation in Israel, and explained it through and through. And I definitely agree with you that this is the biggest problem that we have today.
Thank you so much, Moshe. And just before I go back to Professor Dan for just a final comment, how do you square what Professor Dan said earlier, that really in the 20th century, you believe that from a Torah observant standpoint, we have the rights to the land, to be there, have national sovereignty there, and yet it was really the secular Zionists in the 20th century that were really leading the charge of reestablishing sovereignty there. How do you square those two facts?
Judaism is not a religion. Judaism is a culture of a sovereign nation on its holy land, which, of course, the commitment to the covenant with God, meaning the Torah, okay, is a living culture in its life. Of course, every individual with its own way to see it, but it's not a religion, and I believe that when the temple was destroyed, and we went to an exile of almost 2,000 years, okay, the so-called rabbis, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, the spiritual leaders of the Jewish nation, ask themselves, how are we going to continue? The whole message, yes, of fixing the world in the kingdom of God, that the Jewish nation cannot be fulfilled through a religion. Only through a nation sits in its sovereign land and building this palace for God, meaning the temple in Jerusalem, in holy Jerusalem. So how are we going to keep our identity and now that we don't have our sovereignty, we don't have our temple, we don't have, and we're going to exile? And the answer was amazing. Let's create a religion out of Judaism, a religion that don't need territory, a religion that don't need a temple, a religion that after every pogrom you can go with it to a new place until the next pogrom. And it worked. It kept our identity miraculously, okay, against all rules of history, against all nature and rules of nature, and we came back to Israel just as it's promised in our Torah and in our prophets, against all odds, which is a total miracle, okay? The revival of the Jewish nation. But these pioneers, and here I'm answering your question, these pioneers felt that this religion that kept our identity for 2,000 years now is being ropes on their neck when they're coming to build again the Israeli nationality. And maybe they're right in certain aspects. I can fully understand that, okay? I can fully understand, not that I agree with, but I can fully understand the need to kick out this galut mentality that for them keeping Torah and mitzvot was part of it in order to create this new kind of nationality that will be able to deal with the challenges and the wars that we had here in Israel. But as I mentioned before, it can only create this new invented nationality for a short period of time, for 2 decades. And after the Yom Kippur War, it started to disappear. And we had to go from Zionism of existence, Zionism that Yad Vashem is its temple, to a Zionism of fulfillment, Zionism of radiate a positive message that the temple of the old temple, the old dream of Judaism is its goal.
Right. Well, I have to say to both of you, I'd like to give both of you the chance just for a final 1 minute message, remark, anything you'd like to leave our viewers with. But just before that, to say that this has been such a wide-ranging, thought-provoking, and good faith discussion from both of you that I know our viewers will just so deeply appreciate. I just thought it'd be a good idea to finish with each of you just in reflecting on anything you want that's been said in this discussion. Maybe it's something else, something that was said recently, just to leave each of our viewers with. Professor Dan.
Well, before I make my final comment, let me just respond to something that Moshe said a moment ago, so there is no misunderstanding whatsoever. The national religious part of Israel, these are my closest brothers. I mean, people who serve in the army, work and pay their taxes, can have whatever religious belief they have or they don't have. Not only don't I have any problem with national religious people, they are my brothers. And, by the way, if an ultra-Orthodox serves in the army and works and pays his taxes and everything, then he is my brother like everybody else. When I reject the rabbis, I reject those of the ultra-Orthodox who don't serve in the army, don't work, and actually, in my view, are not Zionist and also are primitive and very often corrupt. But certainly there are other rabbis, and certainly the national religious are the best allies that I can have. Now for a final comment. Building on what Moshe said before, that it's very Jewish to disagree. I mean, I chose to be a Jew. And one of the reasons I chose to be a Jew is to be irreverent. It is basically to accept no authority whatsoever and to say, I have willingly come to the conclusion that I want to be part of this collective and I want to disagree with people and I want to constantly challenge everything and find that we have a lot in common even when we disagree. And I think that the greatest success of Zionism was to recreate the Jewish people as a functioning people. We had a potential of a people because we had a common memory of the past and a common sense of identity, but we had to create a functioning people. And we have created a functioning people. And let me repeat a story that I've already said on a podcast, but I think it's worth telling the story again. You know, I cannot sleep on flights and I cannot read on flights. So I watch dumb films that I would never watch otherwise. And in one of these dumb films, I found a pearl. It is a mother saying to her daughter, you know I love you dearly, and there is nothing I wouldn't do for you, but I don't like you. Basically, this is my attitude to the Jews. I don't like the Jews. They're an unpleasant people, but I love them. And I wouldn't be a part of any other people, because here I feel at home. I can hate people and enjoy it. I can shout at them and enjoy it. And finally, we have something in common. We belong together. We have a solidarity together. Now, for this solidarity, you have to serve in the army. You have to work. Okay? If you don't, you're out of my solidarity group. But we have created the kind of the eighth miracle of the world that is reflected in this war. And again, I will repeat something that I've already said. I think the challenges we met in this war are far greater than the Brits in the Blitz. But they had Churchill as an inspiration, and we have Amsalem and Gottlieb. Okay? So our achievement is much greater, because the strengths of the Jewish people tested. You remember Mene Mene Tekelu Parsin, the writing on the wall. You were tested, you were weighed in the balance and found wanting. We were weighed in the balance and found having given something to ourselves that is beyond anything that you can possibly imagine. The resilience, the belief, the commitment is more important than this or that political achievement.
Thank you so much. And Moshe, final word?
My brother is my brother, even if he is defective or not working or not serving enough, to my opinion. He's still my brother. And I feel that the leftists are my brothers. I feel that the Haredim are my brothers. I love most of them. They're a very, very small minority of people that I hate. Somebody you hate your brother, but he's still your brother. Okay? The definition of who's a Jew, who is a Jew and part of the Jewish family, if I can call it, using these terms, is not if he served the army or did not serve the army. Of course, I agree that we should all serve and we should all work. I definitely agree. But put it as a definition of who's belong to my nation and who's not, I disagree. And I want to just say to as my summarize my concepts. Look, I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic, Oli. I see, there are two things that happens today in Israel that are miracle. Israel is the only micro-civilization, not the only, I would not call it the only Western state, because it's a Western state only in the outside, in the way it looks. You may look at it, see the skyscrapers in Tel Aviv, the cranes, the high tech, and think, hey, it's another European country or Western country. It's not. It's a whole civilization to itself, okay? Micro-civilization. So Israel is the only micro-civilization in the world, not only in the West, that basically having children today, okay? More than 2.1 for women. The whole world is crumbling down, East and West, including most of the Arab nations. In Iran today, there's, I think, 1.6 or 1.7 children for women. So we're talking about the whole civilization is crumbling down because of progressivism, by the way. Okay? Not in Israel. You would expect that it will be in Israel as a Western society, it will be the same as the rest of the world. It's not. Something very unique is happening here, okay? And it's not only because of the religious society and the Haredi society, also the secular woman in Israel is having children. Maybe because somehow the culture that comes from the religious catches. But I see that on that Dan is nodding that he's not agreeing, and maybe he's right. Why? Just to strengthen your position here, the Jewish women in a diaspora do not have the same amount of children as in Israel. Okay, and Arabs women in Israel do not have more children. All you need to have the combination of to being Jewish and in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel, that miracle will happen with you. And by the way, this is the most major reason for our economical success. Okay, all economists agree today that one of the major problems with the collapse basically of the Western economies is because of that, the lack of new generation. Okay, so this is the first miracle that happens in Israel, and the second miracle that happened in Israel. Israel is the only micro civilization that the young generation is closer to Jewish identity than his parents and his grandparents. This is amazing thing that happens today. I'm looking at it and I'm rubbing my eyes when I'm looking at that. Where did it come from? And you saw this heroism, and I totally agree with Dan with what he said before. We saw this amazing energy and heroism in this young generation fighting at the 7th of October after all the horrible things that the previous generation of commanders did, and saving Israel from this generation, basically. Okay, so I'm very optimistic, and I see what happens today. The whole Middle East is crumbling down. The whole building of cards building, inventions of new nations, of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Jordanian nation, Syrian nation, Iraqi nation. I see how the whole land between the river and the Euphrates basically is going back to its roots, meaning basically no new nation can hold in this territory. I see how Israel is under the frame of the Americans, okay, together with the Americans, and under the I see how the Americans, how the Trump administration and the war that's going on now in Iran is basically training the Israelis and the Israeli leadership and the Israeli army to think as regional power. And when these all direction, all vectors will combine together, this new generation, this new connection to our faith and our culture, and this new way of thinking, new conscience of regional power will combine together, maybe, not maybe, for sure, these expectations that Balfour and his friends that had from us in 1917 will come to reality.
Well, Moshe, Professor Dan, I once heard a rabbi say there are some things in life that are a privilege, some things in life are a pleasure, but it's that special moment where something is both a privilege and a pleasure. And this was certainly that for me, and I know will be for our audience. Thank you so much for, first of all, being so generous with your time, for talking in such a full-hearted and good faith way about such important issues from two people who care passionately about the future of Israel. I know our audience will not just love it, but they'll be so thoroughly educated, and it will be so thought-provoking for them as it has been for me. So thank you to both of you for your time today, and I hope we can have further conversations like this in the future. I'm just really grateful to you both.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Just hang on for a moment. After covering Israel for years, I've realized that most of the lies boil down to one simple tactic used by Israel's enemies from the very start: the deliberate reversal of cause and effect. And our new documentary exposes exactly how this works. Have a watch of our trailer for our new film called The Great Reversal, and you can watch it in full right now by clicking the link below in the video description. For decades, one idea has shaped how much of the world understands the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel did something wrong, and the Palestinians simply resisted. Whether it's 1948 or the recent war in Gaza, the story is the same every time. Israel provokes, Palestinians resist. Israel oppresses, Palestinians fight back. This narrative dominates campuses, the media, and much of global politics. It feels familiar, it feels intuitive, and for many people, it feels true. But what if the sequence is backwards? What if the origin point and every major chapter that followed has been told in reverse? In the wars of 1948 and 67, in the collapse of Oslo, in the suicide bombings of the Intifada, in the rockets after Israel withdrew from Gaza, in the massacre of October 7th, and the global narrative that followed. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to expose the great lie that has reversed cause and effect, a narrative engineered to help the real aggressors erode Israel's legitimacy. We'll trace the conflict from its origins to the present day, revealing how at every stage the true sequence of events was inverted, how aggression was reframed as resistance, how defense was recast as provocation, and how a conflict rooted in hatred of Jews was deliberately twisted into a story that blames the Jews. Join us as we restore the story to the order in which it actually happened and uncover the truth hidden beneath a century of lies. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.